author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Does diversity, equity, and inclusion signal the death knell for the U.S. military? What lies ahead for a fractured America? And will the Supreme Court of the United States be the savior of the constitutional republic? These are the questions that we'll hopefully find the answers for in this week's special edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We'll be tracking the latest military recruitment numbers, asking why Los Angeles refuses to admit it has an addiction to illegal immigration, and a whole lot more. Now, I'd like to say a special thank you to our listeners across the country for tuning in and joining us today. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Thanks for being here. Well, let's get started. In the United States of America, it's getting tough to get workers. No place more so than the United States military. Now, somebody who's been writing on this topic and has looked deep into the causes, the reasons, the ramifications, and the possible futures is Liberty Nation's military affairs correspondent, who also happens to be the former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller and a retired Air Force pilot himself, Mr. Dave Patterson. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Hi, Mark. Happy to be with you.
So, Dave, military recruitment, it's, we see it all the time. Now, there's a lot of talk about, well, it's benefits, well, it's career prospects, but that's not your view, is it, Dave?
No, it's not. I believe that people join the military for far more patriotic reasons and because, and family reasons as well. Their families have been in the military, and it has proven to be an excellent career choice and a way of life. And it's that basic draw that I think brings young people into the military. And it is also the very same thing that is causing them to stay away. It's the exact opposite now. You're hearing reports that family members would not recommend the military to their children or to their young relatives, and it's because, quite simply, that the Biden administration has done everything they possibly can to persuade people to stay out of the military. It doesn't represent the character traits that we as Americans have always thought and held dear.
Well, you know, so there used to be a thing called the generational soldier, which was grandparents in the military, usually grandfathers, of course, for the most part, then fathers, then sons and daughters would, they'd spend their life shipping around the world, as pads brats, as we call them in the British military, and they'd be on base there, and it would be a career to go into, and it's something that they were proud of doing. They're following in the family footsteps. But you say that this is because of the Biden administration, but isn't it also because there was almost after Vietnam, I guess, that there was a lot of people coming home, and there were, the talk of the baby killers in Vietnam, and that they weren't the heroes of the Second World War anymore, and that kind of got swept up into a cultural morass where being a soldier wasn't a values-driven thing anymore, or it wasn't recognized as being a values-driven thing anymore.
I think that there's a certain amount of truth in what you say. However, the dynamics of the time were extremely important in how all of that worked out in 1973, when you went from a conscripted military to an all-volunteer military that had a great deal to do with it, a decision to downsize the military to a certain extent, and though you had some gaps, it tended not to be as troubling as it is today. And again, I go back to this. What are the values? And if you read the stuff I write, I sort of rail against this notion that the military should be a mirror of society. No, you want the military to be better than the society. You're a dad and you say, oh boy, I've got two sons. One's a Marine fighter and the other is a chief drag queen mate on the USS, Christian Dior. No, nobody wants that as an image. I mean, honestly.
Although there was a popular song called "In the Navy" back in the late 70s, I believe.
Yeah, right. Wasn't that by let's see who did that?
The Village People, right?
The Village People, of
Yeah.
course. The paragon of values that we all look forward to.
Sure. Now, so you say that Joe Biden's really bringing this recruitment debacle to a head in what he's doing now, policy-wise. What would you say that is?
I think that the obvious example of what has happened is you just had a recent House passed a National Defense Authorization Act for FY 2024, and in it they said, no, we're not going to have diversity, equity, and inclusion as our primary standard barometer for whether or not we're going to be a capable military. And oh, by the way, no, we're not going to have drag queen shows for as a family event. And the other thing that it has come to the fore and is this notion that the Pentagon has taken it upon themselves to be the social justice warriors and take on social issues which, as the leadership, which they have never done before, like the abortion issue. They're circumventing the law in order to satisfy the whims of people who want to have abortions.
So there's the DIE, die as Jordan Peterson calls it, although DEI is the
right. No, he's right.
He's right. But yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The idea that these three tenets can make a more effective fighting force. I mean, what do you really want from your army? You want them to be the best at hurting people and blowing up their stuff, right? That's what you want.
Killing and breaking their stuff. Right.
Killing and breaking their stuff. Now, equity. Explain to me, Dave, if you can, how equity fits into that.
Sure. What they're looking for is equality of outcome. That's equity. That means that everybody gets the same when the sausage comes out the end of the grinder, whereas equality is the opportunity to be what you want to be. And we want as a military, we want the opportunity for everyone to reach their capability, not to lower. Equity is an egalitarian concept.
Yeah.
Whereas equality is an opportunity concept, and that's the concept on which this nation was built.
I agree completely. The idea that everybody should end up at the exact same point is it's almost ludicrous, because especially in a military structure, because, well, why aren't I a general?
Yeah, good point.
And why isn't the guy next door to me? Why isn't he a general? Don't we all deserve to be generals if that's our equity? Dave, final question for you here, and I don't go too dystopian, even though I know that we both love the dystopian stuff. Where do you see this going for the United States military if it continues on this course of pushing DEI or DIE?
So I think that if you look at the history of the United States, we put up with this nonsense up to a point, and then we do this rather drastic reaction to things. And I think that what's going to happen here is that we will react to this, and in a way that perhaps will go a little bit too far. But nonetheless, I think that the life expectancy for DEI is rapidly reducing, and it will. People will certainly realize very quickly. And the battlefield is the equalizer. Yeah. You send these clowns out there, and they won't last long. And so it tends to be the reality and the practical aspects of real life that will probably take care of this problem.
A fighting force for the parade ground rather than the battlefield. Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much.
Hey, thank you, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
homelessness once again is rampant in Los Angeles and California, and it all seems to be a bit of a mystery. Now, do we need to call in Scooby-Doo or Sherlock Holmes to solve it? I don't think we do. We have with us Liberty Nation's political columnist, Joe Schaefer, who has written extensively on the subject, to join us and find the answers. Thanks for coming in, Joe.
Thank you, Mark.
So, Joe, as we know, it's pretty much everywhere, isn't it, now that the homelessness issue in Los Angeles and other California cities is getting out of control. And it seems that elements on the left are stumped as to why this might be. But you, with your quick thinking and industrious detective techniques, have figured out the answer, haven't you, Joe?
Yeah, it was a really brilliant deduction. They are being deliberately obtuse, which is not a surprise. They have agenda to pursue, and illegal immigration, supporting, embracing illegal immigration is part of that agenda, and they do not want to recognize that that is fueling the homelessness problem. And the article I wrote about Los Angeles, they went out of their way to present it like it's a major mystery. Why is this happening? Why are we having this? I think it was a 10% rise in homelessness recently. And of course, the population was huge to begin with. Well, at the same time, they're officially codifying into city law their sanctuary status, encouraging more and more illegal aliens to pour into the city. And they know that this is the result. If you dig deeper, if you find their official homelessness department, they have talked about how illegal aliens are more prone to be homeless. So they know it. And yet they say, oh, it's a mystery. We don't understand. And don't scapegoat illegal aliens. Don't say that they're more likely to be homeless, even though they know that that is true. So it's a deliberate attempt to not solve the problem and then wring their hands and saying, boy, this is a vexing problem. It's really outrageous to the citizens who have to suffer for this.
Well, that's got to be my question, really. Why are the citizens putting up with it? Because they must know. It's not as though this is a big secret, right? It's not. Joe, I loved your article on the pages of libertynation.com, but it was not in any way a surprise to me that the homelessness situation is being driven up and exacerbated and sucking the resources that they've assigned to the homelessness situation by having mass illegal immigration and then providing sanctuary, providing resources for these unfortunates who don't have the support network within the country. Essentially, the state stepping in to take over the role that family and friends in a community would normally have, which is a whole other issue. But it's not a surprise. It wasn't a surprise to me at all. Unfortunately, I loved the article, but it wasn't a surprise to me that the answer is, well, more illegal immigration, more homelessness. So why don't the people of Los Angeles, who are the ones bearing not only the societal brunt of this, but the crime brunt, the safety brunt, the lack of resource or resources being put somewhere else brunt of this whole thing, why are they not seemingly aware of it? Or are they? And they just would prefer not to have a Republican in charge? Or am I being too political on that?
No, but it's right around the corner, because this is not sustainable. When you're having a city crumble, it's become unlivable, Los Angeles. The streets are unsafe to walk on. I don't care how progressive you are as a LA resident. Once it gets to the point where you can't leave your house, even during the day, you're going to say you've had enough. And it's interesting that we're seeing this in Chicago right now, where Black residents of Chicago who normally support progressive candidates because they, for political reasons that benefit them, they have seen this stop to illegal aliens and how it is destroying the city. They live in the city too, and it's unsustainable. And you are seeing a backlash. You're seeing Black Chicagoans saying, what about us? Why do you put illegal aliens ahead of us? Which is, of course, what American citizens have been saying throughout the country for years now. It's finally hitting home into these urban areas that encouraged this greater swath of progressivism. The chickens are coming home to roost. You're going to have to live with this now. It's not sustainable. And so the people who support these progressive policies are going to turn away from this. We're seeing it in Chicago right now. We're seeing it in San Francisco in a very interesting way. Another article I just wrote, as the San Francisco Chronicle, big box establishment newspaper, surprised that they actually did it. They exposed how the open air drug market in San Francisco, which has made that city unlivable again, is controlled by Honduran migrants, young male Honduran migrants who pour into the city. So, it's coming out.
Let's just point out, by the way, that they're noticeable because they're often armed with machetes or knives. Isn't that correct?
Literally said that in the article. They're armed with machetes. So, how progressive do you have to be as a San Francisco citizen to put up with machete-armed Honduran drug dealers? You can only push the envelope so far, and these politicians have really. They've extended it to the point where something's going to break.
You keep saying, Joe, that this is unsustainable, and yet it seems to me that it will continue regardless. So what is the end point here? That we see even more of an exodus from these deep blue urban centers? Or where does this movie finish, in your opinion?
In my opinion, this is all deliberate. If you were going to destroy a country from within, destroying the cities is a great way to start. How can anybody say that this is just incompetence or mistakes when they are literally destroying America's greatest cities? They're uninhabitable. They're having the massive flight out of these areas. Which is a huge loss in tax revenue. So you're going to run out of the money to even try to solve these problems, which, as we've pointed out, they're not sincerely trying to do in the first place. So you're destroying the major cities of the United States. There is an effort on this. The Biden administration is leading the way. Anthony Blinken went to a summit in Denver earlier this year that says we are using the cities of the West to establish a global transnationalism, the idea of countries working together, not in their own national interests. So you're seeing this cities are a focal point of an agenda. And part of the agenda is create chaos, create problems, and create trouble. So you can say we have to have radical solutions to this problem, which is globalism, which is socialism, which is all these things that they're pushing. So I truly believe the rot is intentional. And if the citizens of these cities who are progressive, if they don't step up, it's only going to keep getting worse because the people doing this want it to get worse.
It's the old problem reaction solution that David Icke, the British, I guess many people call him the conspiracist. The British conspiracist says, create a problem, evoke a reaction, and then present the solution that you wanted all along. Joe Schaefer, thank you ever so much for joining us today. And please do read Joe's writings on this topic on the pages of libertynation.com. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The national debt and climate change, two issues that are inextricably linked. Now, what's the connection? How do they affect the American consumer? And how do they affect the future of America going forward? We're very fortunate to be joined by Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor and general fan of all things fiscal. Thanks for being here, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, it's my favorite topic, and I'm sure it's yours too. It's the national debt. Now, you and I were talking off camera just now that it's something that I don't understand. I claim to be a fairly smart man, and I try to put that aura across to people, but I don't understand.
Smarter than I am. I'll say that. You're smarter than I am.
That's very kind of you to say, but Andrew can do math, and that's a good jump from me. Now, so the national debt, I don't understand, Andrew, how it can ever be paid off.
It won't.
What's the latest on the national debt? Sorry to interrupt. The reason I bring this up is because I saw that we've already breached like 1.3 trillion with just 9 months into the fiscal year. And I don't see how this is a sustainable situation, Andrew. Please explain it to me like I'm a somewhat slow 4-year-old.
Well, it's not a sustainable situation. Fed Chair Jerome Powell, he goes on Congress regularly and he says the same thing. The long term, this is not a sustainable path. Liberty Nation's been writing about it for years, and many of the smartest minds in the economics world have warned that it's not sustainable. Even now, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers says, no, this is not sustainable. So you have $32 trillion national debt. The fiscal debt, the federal deficit, and there's still 3 months left to go in the fiscal year, is already above $1.3 trillion. You do a rolling 12-month average, it's above $2 trillion. So every time the current administration says we cut $1.7 trillion from the deficit, okay, let's ignore the dollars and cents of that. Look at the long-term projections and say, okay, you do that, but over the next 10 years, it's going to reach $50 trillion. So your 1.7 is nothing compared to the larger cumulative deficits.
Cumulative deficits. What was it Einstein said about cumulative interest? It's the most powerful force in the universe. I think
I doubt he said that. I highly doubt Einstein said that.
Well, it's attributed to him in numerous places. He may not have said it. Or somebody trying to sell Einstein stickers and interest packages maybe said it on his behalf. Now, let's talk about so what's happening with the debt and, as you point out, the deficit. See, we were talking about this, weren't we, Andrew? And it seems that even if everything were cut, literally everything, you cut Social Security, you put a freeze on military spending for 5 years, you cut all government assistance programs, it's still not going to go down, is it?
No, it's not, because the government's still borrowing money. So this national debt, when a Republican or a Democrat says we're going to tackle the national debt, don't believe that person, because no serious person believes that this thing is coming down anytime soon. All the proposals being, discussed in Washington does nothing. You look at that Fiscal Responsibility Act, the debt ceiling agreement, and the Republicans are saying, hey, look, we're going to save, $1 trillion over 10 years. It doesn't matter, because the meat and potatoes of this thing is you have a $50 trillion national debt, you're having $10 trillion of cumulative deficits, and with higher interest payments in over the current fiscal year, interest payments are already above $600 billion. Once this fiscal year is over, there's a good chance it touches the $1 trillion mark. That's more than so many other government programs you have: defense, veterans assistance, food stamps, whatever the case. I think the only thing is higher than interest payments are like Social Security and Medicare. Everything else, I was told, the biggest budgetary items you have are interest payments.
So I know it's not an exact meshing matrix, as it were, but I believe that the GDP is going to expected in the next couple of years to the debt repayments. Sorry, the debt repayments will top GDP by 107%. Is that correct?
Are you talking about the debt to GDP ratio or the interest in GDP ratio? Yeah, so the debt to GDP ratio, it'll be above. I think the CBO said it was about 117%, and the deficit to GDP ratio, that's going to climb to about 5%. So these numbers are just going up, no matter what these. I mean, you look at the White House budget numbers itself. They even underestimated in their last budget, about interest payments. They've estimated that would be about $300 billion. So they were off, and numbers already double, and it could triple by the end of the fiscal year. So nobody gets these numbers right. So I think what you should be doing is preparing for the worst case scenario that, interest rates are going a little bit higher according to the Fed, and then they're going to remain high for the next couple of years, and then they're going to be lowered most likely by 25 or 50 basis point increments. So you're still going to have elevated interest costs with the Fed funds rate, and then how about you're paying on the debt?
So Andrew, as an economist, what is the solution?
There's nothing that the government can do to pay off this $32 trillion national debt. I think it was on your last radio program, we said that if the government confiscated all billionaires' wealth, that would keep the halls of Congress open for about 6 months. That's all it would achieve. There's nothing that anyone can do, this petty plan or this, Fiscal Responsibility Act. Nothing's gonna be done. I hate to be the bearer. I don't be pessimistic about it, but there's nothing. I mean, everyone just put their hands up and say, yeah, we're done. We lost. We're ever going to resolve this issue.
Okay, so it's spend till you drop, or you get kicked out of office and leave it for somebody else to deal with. Now, speaking of spending, Andrew, I believe climate change and climate change policy has reared its somewhat ugly head in the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, well, this has been an ongoing issue for a few months now, but it actually dates back a few years because there are a lot of people within the Fed who wants the central bank to be a climate policy maker. So one of the main names is Lael Brainerd. She was a Fed governor. She became vice chair, and now she's the White House top economist. But her idea was pretty much the Fed needs to start, incorporating climate change into its mandates. Just today, or at the time of the recording, there was a House Financial Services subcommittee meeting, and one of the top Fed officials said, "Oh, the Fed's not a climate policy maker." But if you look at all the things it's doing, you can see that it eventually will be, because a lot of it are incrementally increasing its presence in this field. So one of the things it has is the climate scenario analysis. That's pretty much determining how banks can handle financial risks of climate change. So that's just one issue. And then you have all these other folks who are saying, the Fed needs to start like social policy needs to start thinking about the environment and how it raises interest rates, or how it prints money, or how it regulates the banks.
Now, this is not strictly an economics observation, Andrew, but it seems to me that all these areas of the Fed they're getting into diversity, equity, inclusion, they're getting into climate change now, social governance, ESG stuff. It seems to me that costs money with very little return on investment to the people who are paying the Fed's wages. Why are they doing it, Andrew? Why are they doing it? It seems like a fiscal black hole.
Oh, okay. Well, no. Well, and Jerome Powell, he's the head of the Federal Reserve, and he says repeatedly that this should not be up to the Federal Reserve. This should be up to elected branches of government. But you guarantee that the next person who serves at the Fed, which will likely be appointed if Joe Biden's reelected, he's going to appoint someone hard left, and that person is going to make sure that climate change is integral to how the Federal Reserve dictates policy. Now, I don't think it should be. A lot of Fed officials don't think so. I can think of two names: Christopher Waller, Michelle Bowman. They don't think the Fed should do it. I'm pretty sure a lot of woke economists in the Fed, a lot of Fed governors do think so, because a lot of them do lean, left, and they've made comments about the climate change, how the Fed can grapple this issue. And also, one more thing too.
Nice.
The Federal Reserve is part of just recently joined something called the NGFS. It's a global network of central banks that discuss how they can propose recommendations to tackle climate change and how they can bolster climate financing on the world stage. So those are more evidence. It's more evidence that the Federal Reserve is expanding its mandate without receiving congressional authority, because they're all woke.
Wokenomics. It's the new show to rival your Swamponomics thing. So one quick question for you, Andrew. So where do you see interest rates heading in the near term?
Well, according to the summary of economic projections, they penciled in at least two more rate hikes, or one more rate hike at the time of this reporting. So the median policy rate could be 5.6%. The futures market is now no longer penciling in rate cuts. So a lot of Fed officials say we should just raise interest rates one more time, leave them there for a while, look around, see what's happening, and then maybe start considering lowering interest rates.
And how does that work out for savers?
What is maybe?
It's always maybe. It's always maybe. That way they can say, "Well, look how well I predicted things." I put a maybe in there. Andrew Moran, thank you very much for joining us, and maybe we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The Supreme Court is over for the season, but what ramifications were there, and what taste has it left in America's mouth? Fortunate to be joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, constitutional scholar, lawyer, man about town, and dapper gentleman for the day, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, and host of the Excellent Uprising podcast, to discuss the term that we've just experienced of the Supreme Court. Scott, for me, it was an amazing term to watch. What do you make of it?
Yes. Well,
and that's all we have time for with that erudite answer from Mr. Cosenza.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you for having me. First of all, it certainly was an interesting term to watch. For somebody who I have spent basically my adult life kind of be interested in the work of the court and all that goes on there, and to see it come around from a time where abortion law, for instance, in this country was so open to the notion that not only were abortions legally permissible, but we've actually had case law in this country from the Supreme Court whereby free speech rights were restricted outside of abortion centers, that you couldn't approach a woman who you thought was going to have an abortion and say to her, please don't do this. Don't engage in this procedure. It's wrong. It's not okay. And so to see that come from there to, now that we have Dobbs and we have the situation where states can restrict abortion massively, and to see now, Mark, with affirmative action and these other cases falling and gun control and more and more and more, historic is right. But, there will be another turn at some point in the future. So it's mostly about, seeing what's happening now and just
swings and roundabouts, we call it in my home country. Swings and roundabouts, goes one way then the other. So yeah, it really was. I think obviously I haven't been watching the courts as long as yourself, Scott, but there was the bright line gun ruling with New York Rifle and Pistol versus Bruin. There was
even more than
action.
I'd say you're even soft selling it with that, because it's not just a bright line. It's actually more powerful ruling for the gun rights proponents, Mark, for the gun people and for Americans who want that treasured Second Amendment right to be guaranteed, because the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin case doesn't stand for the notion of, well, here's a line that you can't cross. The line is, it better not have been illegal, at the time of the founding, basically, to strip somebody of their gun rights. And I hope we're going to talk about a case the Supreme Court has coming up for the next term that impacts this.
Is this the qualified immunity case?
No, that's the no. It's a case about whether or not you can strip someone of their gun rights who has been adjudicated to have committed domestic abuse.
Actually, right, I know this one. Yes, so let's go straight into that. Actually,
it's called
Scott.
U.S. v. Rahimi. That's the
U.S.
name
v.
of the
Rahimi.
case. And it's one of the 2 or 3 big cases that have already been selected by the Supreme Court to hear in their next seating that happens after they come back from their summer breaks. Yes.
Well, let's get into that. So before you give us the outlines of the case, could you give us the ramifications of hearing this particular case?
Well, that's the only thing that matters, right? The ramifications. Yeah. Mr. Rahimi, by all accounts, is probably a very awful person who's done a bunch of bad stuff, and that's why he's in the situation he's in. I don't hear anybody saying, he was innocently walking down the street and accused of all kinds of.
He's no George Floyd, right?
Right. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that anything can be done to him, of course, without regard to his rights. And what he has asserted is that by the way, this is a person who was convicted of being for a person who was forbidden from possessing a firearm and possessing a firearm. That's the conviction we're talking about. That can come from any number of legal mechanisms. In his case, it was because he had this domestic violence issue. And so the issue in Rahimi is, can you strip a person of their Second Amendment rights absent some hearing designed to specifically do so? The facts established on this domestic violence stuff, think of other fundamental rights that are offered to Americans. Could you strip them of the right to vote? Or, again, he's not I don't think he was a convicted felon. So that's the part where, it differs from other laws. If you want to convict somebody and remove their rights, we have a mechanism to do that. It's called a criminal conviction, right? But
or felony conviction. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I probably should have front loaded that. What we're talking about is our civil determinations by judges. So that's why. Because if you were listening to me and thought, well, gee, they take people's rights away all the time when they throw them in a prison. Yes, that's true, because they've been criminally convicted. And in this case, what states have done in order to kind of grease the skids for removing accused abusers from households is have it be done in a civil court where the burden of proof is much lower. And so so basically you're getting a civil law treatment, and the consequences are much more dire than is ordinarily brought forth in civil court, which is usually about money damages, mostly, and contract disputes.
Okay, and so Mr. Rahimi,
yes,
has been stripped of his constitutional right to own, bear arms.
So Mr. Rahimi was stripped of that right, and then chose to possess a firearm and was convicted of possessing it, and he's now challenging that conviction and saying that it was wrong for the courts to grant that I had been stripped of my rights, that stripping of the rights was in violation of my constitutional rights to not have my rights be stripped from me without some sort of sufficient procedural, some kind of process.
Now, I'm assuming, Scott, because this has been accepted by the Supreme Court, which I guess at least 4 justices have agreed to hear it.
Yes.
That this has potential to impact many people, not just the Mr. Rahimi, who the case is named after. It has if a ruling is delivered on this one way or the other, then if it's ruled against that it was right to have his rights stripped, it was correct to have his rights stripped, then we're likely to see civil proceeding against many more people taking away their right to bear arms. However, if they agree
once again, let me stop you right there, because I think you're soft selling the breadth and scope.
That's always me, here. Scott. I'm so understated. I'm such a subtle guy.
Which is that if legislatures can work to strip people of their rights and at the same time carve out exceptions to where those rights are taken without any kind of criminal trial, and the procedure, may not necessarily even include their participation. There's something called where the
red flag laws.
Yeah, like, right. Okay. So without going down that rabbit hole, this doesn't necessarily stop at guns. What would stop a legislature from using this in any other manner of speaking? Maybe if you haven't taken a certain antiviral shot that is prescribed by public authorities, for instance, can we strip people of their rights for that? So it goes well beyond just the firearms area, but it is quite broad in that area too. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody realizes, when we talk about these issues at the Supreme Court, and the reason why they're so fought over with such vigor is because of their impact, not just for the specific litigants or that even issue, but
they essentially trickle down to every court in the land, which I don't know. To me, that seems like quite a good way, to determine if something is constitutional or not. And then all the lower courts, the ones with the little fiefdoms with the politically appointed judges. Of course, some of them are very great and wonderful people who deserve to be there. Others are there because they went to school with somebody else. But they all have to essentially consider that at some point, this could make it to the Supreme Court, whatever I'm ruling on here. And then it's going to look bad on me when students learn about this for decades to come, that it was my bad decision that took this to the court. Well, if the next season of The Justices, available on Netflix and all good podcast providers, I guess, is anything like the last one, it's going to be quite the show. Scott, are you hopeful for more constitutionally favorable rulings in the next session?
Hope springs eternal, Mark.
Hope springs eternal. Wise words indeed from Mr. Scott DeCosenza. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, Joe Schaefer, and Scott DeCosenza for taking the time to come in and join us on this show. And also to you at home for taking the time to tune in and have a listen. I'd like to leave you with the important, poignant, and ever so accurate words of Ronald Reagan, who said, "I hope we once again have reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts." And it seems we've arrived at a point where the common man and woman must realize that the prime operation of the government is to say, if it isn't broken, let's try and fix it anyway. Because the basic understanding and ideas that we have for a successful society, well, let's admit it, they differ greatly from that of the federal government. And I think it's time we all realize that significant truth. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.